Hey guys, how you doing? For average Canadians, there are two things that can come up with estate planning that are like really potentially complicated and can cause a whole lot of, family strife. And so I'm going to talk about one of those today. The other one is, planning a family cottage or, cabin or whatever in the estate. This can get very ugly, especially in the third generation when it's like, okay, now there's two parents that own it and then there's, four other kids. So I'll talk about that in another video. But this one is equally as, problematic or potentially even worse in the case that I'm going to give. And this is when people get married later in life and come into it with their own assets. Their children are adults. So, your new spouse is not like really a step parent to your children. They haven't helped raise them. And you're trying to figure out how to make sure that your money goes to your children and their money goes to their children, even though you want your surviving spouse to also be in a good financial position after you pass away. Because this can lead to some of the worst problems you've ever heard of. So, there's a million different cases of how this can be set up, but in some cases it's not a concern, which would be, the best case example. You've got, a husband comes into a relationship with money. He meets some new wife, comes into the relationship with money. Neither of them have any children. They move in together. They live happily ever after. They're super rich because they were both able to retire fully on their own. Now they've combined their money. They should probably do a plan together, but it's not as important. Now one of them passes away, the other spouse gets the money, and then the second spouse passes away, and that all gets distributed to the Canadian government. Absolutely perfect. No, you should maybe pick a charity rather than having them just kind of take it or divvy it up to whoever they want. But then there's the worst case scenario. So you imagine this, you've got a widowed mom, your parents worked really hard, you worked really hard, you have a whole bunch of money, your widowed mom meets a loser, she, gets married to this loser, and you're kind of okay with it because, at least this loser makes her happy. And whatever, they're spending the money and living and blah, blah, blah. Everything's going fine. And then your mom passes away. And instead of having it properly, structured, all of that money goes over to this loser new husband. It's a tax-free rollover to the spouse, gets the house, gets all the investments. All of these things are now in this person's name. And they decide to say, okay, well, I'm going to go and rewrite my will now and leave all of this money that's now mine to my loser kids. Worst case scenario. So like I said, there are like a million different scenarios. I'm not going to give an example in this video. If you want one, you're interested in this, I'll happily do it if you comment like, yeah, I'd like to hear more about this. But for now, let's just talk about what you should do in this case if this is you or this is your parents. The first thing that needs to happen is like a real conversation about what the money looks like and what it's going to do if you don't change anything right now and something happens to either side. Because that's first and foremost the most important thing to know. And then you say, okay, well, I don't like the way that is structured. So now we want to talk about how you want it to be structured, where you're going to then need to go to a, proper estate lawyer that deals with this and says, here are some options. And then that's where, an accountant and then a planner can potentially come back in, because you're going to have to utilize a proper will, of course, but then next you might want to be getting a little bit creative because there's some money there. You want to make sure everybody's taken care of, but you want your wishes to be taken care of. And so in that case, you can start to look into the use of trusts for your kids or for your spouse, or utilizing some sort of combination of trust and insurance to make sure that these things are working the way you want them to without costing, too much money, because, a lot of people in this industry are going to give you, this like Cadillac option that's going to cost you a fortune when it could have been done a lot easier for a lot less money. So it is a huge conversation that you should have if this is your situation, because this can lead to hell for your family. And we don't want that. So anyway, if you want to learn more, I'll talk about cabins in a little more detail right away, because those are also really complicated. And I'm happy to do some sort of examples of what you could do in certain situations. But obviously, it's just kind of fun and creative to talk about different options, because it's not like we know which one's going to be the best in this case, but you just want to make sure that it's set up so that things will happen the way you want them to happen. Otherwise, all your money could go to waste and your kids might not be very happy. Cheers.